Hello, everybody. This is our new set of notes, has to do with evolution. This is 8-1. And evolution is about how things change over time, not necessarily how we came from monkeys and developed into Homer Simpson. But we're going to cover all sorts of different theories of evolution. There's 17 different kinds, so we'll just take a look at a few of them. So don't worry, we're not going to be talking about the fact that the Earth came from the Big Bang and all that kind of stuff. We're mainly going to be looking at how organisms can change over time due to changes in their allele frequency. So let's get going. All right, it all started with this guy named Charles Darwin, and he's kind of the important dude, even though there were lots of other people that had an effect on what people agree now is called natural selection, survival of the fittest, and all that. But he's the one who's known for it because he was the one who published a paper on his findings, and so that's why everybody thinks of him when we say evolution. He went on a trip when he was just 22 years old on this ship called the HMS Beagle. And what they did was they were out exploring the world, doing mapping and looking for spices and gold and things like that. So he got hired to come along the trip because he was a naturalist, and naturalist is just someone who studies nature. So he was there to collect plant and animal specimens to see what lived in different places because they were here in Europe. And so when they got on the ship, they kind of traveled all over the world, but one of the first places they did was go around South America, where the Galapagos Islands were, and that's where the majority of his work was done. From there, they continued on over to Australia, right around here, New Zealand, where he learned lots of interesting things, in Australia as well. All the other places had cool stuff as well, but nothing as cool as the Galapagos and Australia. So they were on this trip for about 5 years, and when he came back, he had thousands upon thousands of specimens and notebooks and journals filled with all sorts of information. So he brought that all back and shared it with the scientific community. Now, before he went on his travels, the people of England and the world nearby thought that the Earth was very, very young, no more than 6,000 years old. Now, if you ask a geologist, the Earth is, 4.5 billion years old, so slight discrepancy. People believed that each species that they found was unique and never changed. So, if you were that weird looking fish that has a little dangly eyeball, that's a fish. Had that little dangly light over him. Well, he was always that way from creation and is never modified at all. So if you're a crazy looking thing like this, well, you were born like that. And, if you look 6,000 years ago, the animals looked just like that there was no change whatsoever to the species as time went on. And they also believed that any sort of variation in the type of animal, like this chickens, we're used to plain old regular chickens. Well, it's kind of regular, but there's all sorts of different kinds with long feathers, big foofy heads, these guys with the funky feet, all sorts of good stuff. They thought that that wasn't an adaptation, that that's not a change, that that's actually just an imperfection. So that wasn't something that benefited them, like we believe now, but it's just something that happened on accident. So Darwin, on his trip to the Galapagos, he took lots and lots of observations about the world around him because, in England, you don't get to see cool stuff like this. And so he noticed that all the places that he went, he saw these geologic formations, and he knew that they were caused by things like erosion. And erosion is a very slow, continuous process. And he says, okay, well, if it takes 500 years just to erode this much, well, you can't do this much in just 6,000 years. There's no way that the Earth has to be older than that, because there's no way that the Grand Canyon could be made in 6,000 years. It's going to need way more than that. So he came up with the idea that geologic changes like erosion and things like that were caused by a slow process that had to have taken more than the previously believed 6,000 years. He also found fossils, and his fossils, like this guy right there, it's a trilobite, and this guy right here, which is your average isopod or roly-poly, he realized that, hey, maybe these guys are kind of related to each other, and that over time, he's accumulated enough little changes that over enough time, he ended up looking like this. So he thought that fossils were, that the modern species that we have now living were descended from these guys by changing over time. But remember, the people said, no, 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 this and this are two totally completely different animals. But he's saying, no, 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 I think they may have been the same animal, but he's just accumulated enough changes that he eventually turned into that. And so people were kind of looking at him kind of funny. And then he realized that the way that these animals changed was due to the fact that they had adaptations. And one of the main things that he studied were these birds called finches. And you've probably seen finches in pet stores, and they have these cute little beaks. And he saw all these different finches, and he thought they were all different species. And then he realized, wait a minute, they all look like they may have come from this guy. But since he ate different types of foods, his beaks changed a little bit. He ate different foods, his beak changed a little bit, and so on. And then eventually that made different species from this original one. Now remember, the people at the time said, no, that was formed just like that. That bird was formed just like that. That bird was formed just like that. And you say, no, no, no. I think this was the original bird that was formed, and these came from it. So people started looking at him a little funny, saying, I don't know about this Darwin dude. And, he was a church-going man, and so he knew that his ideas were going to be looked at as odd and, against the church. So he actually didn't say anything, a whole lot of stuff when he got home. So he just wrote it all down in a book. And it wasn't until later, when he was like in his 70s, that he finally decided he should probably publish the book. So as he went around, one of the more famous things that he did was to go to the Galapagos Island. And the islands, as you can see, they're all over the place here. When he went to these different islands, he found these species of tortoises. And what he noticed was that each island had its own food source that was different from the other one. And so he noticed that these tortoises had different types of shells. So this guy right here had a very low, flat shell, but a very long neck. And that's because all his food was high up in bushes. This guy had a normal dome shape to it and a very short neck, and all his food was on the ground. And then this guy, well, there was some food on the ground and some food up high, and so he kind of needed a little bit of both. And so he thought, now I wonder if these three are differently, different species, or is this one just kind of like a hybrid between these two? And so all this stuff he was thinking, he's just like, I don't know. I don't know what all this means. I need to do some more research. So he started studying those finches. And those finches, he realized, all had something in common with this finch that was found in South America. But all these finches were found on the island. So he said, well, how is that? Well, what he came to think was that this original bird on South America, flew over somehow, got carried by current, whatever. Some migratory birds ended up on the islands. Now, on the Galapagos Islands, there's a whole bunch, and they all have different foods. So what happened is that this beak landed on all these different islands that had different types of food, seeds, cactus flowers, buds, insects, things like that. And so every once in a while, this bird would have babies that had slight variations in their beaks. Some beaks were bigger, some beaks were smaller, and so on. And what he found was that the babies who had the bigger beaks, who could eat the seeds, survived, reproduced, and made more big-beaked babies. But all the ones that had these little bitty beaks, by accident, couldn't survive over here because they could never crack open a seed, so they starved to death. Well, vice versa over here. These guys who ate little bitty teeny tiny seeds and insects like gnats, well, their little beaks helped them to survive better than these guys who couldn't catch those bugs. And so eventually over time, what ended up happening is we got all these different finches with beaks that were perfectly adapted for eating the food that was on their island. So it's like they all started out as a generic form over here, but once they got to the different islands, they specialized in the food that they ate. So what happens if I take this bird and put him on this island? He probably won't survive, and the other way around. So he figured that all these birds had adaptations that allowed them to survive better than others. And he said that was his idea as to why animals looked different on the different places he traveled. Why did a tortoise have a shell this place on this island, this shell on another island, and a big shell, that's his head goes there, big shell on another island. Why? Why don't all tortoises look the same? Why don't all birds have the same beaks? Because he figured out, oh, it has to do with adaptations. So, what types of adaptations do humans have that allow them to survive better than animals? Well, one of the things that humans and other primates have is an opposable thumb. That allows us to do so many more things, like use tools that other animals can't do. And that's kind of what makes us unique. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little lab activity that has to do with adaptations and how that allows you to survive better than your neighbor nearby, and why you will survive and reproduce and make offspring and your neighbor won't. All right, that's it for today. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.